Welcome to Poetry Changes Lives, where poetry meets history and a thought for the day too. And on this day, way back in history, here's your history lesson today. In 1326, King Edward II of England was deposed by forces led by his wife Isabella and her favourite, the exiled Roger de Mortimer. Well, Edward II was a rather weak king. He was the son of the fearsome Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots, who was one of the toughest kings ever to sit on the English throne. He ruled for 20 years, but his son was weak and indecisive and tended to have favourites at court, whom he entrusted with a lot of power. Eventually, his wife Isabella, who was a fearsome lady by all accounts, she was known as the she-wolf of France. She was French. She had had enough, and she joined Mortimer, who was plotting to overthrow Edward. Poor old Edward was deposed in favour of his son, Edward III, and he was imprisoned in Berkeley Castle, where he was later murdered in the most horrible way by having a red-hot poker shoved up his posterior. And they say that his screams were heard throughout the whole town of Berkeley. A terrible end for a king. Well, Mortimer himself was later executed for treason, but Isabella, the she-wolf of France, was allowed to live on in comfort until she died 20 years later. I think everyone was frightened to death of her. Well, today I'm reading a poem by Rudyard Kipling entitled "The Female of the Species," which I hope you enjoy. Here it is. When the Himalayan peasant meets the he-bear in his pride, he shouts to scare the monster, who will often turn aside. But the she-bear, thus accosted, rends the peasant tooth and nail, for the female of the species is more deadly than the male. When Nag, the basking cobra, hears the careless foot of man, he will sometimes wriggle sideways and avoid it if he can, but his mate makes no such motion when she camps beside the trail, for the female of the species is more deadly than the male. When the early Jesuit fathers preached to Hurons and Choctaws, they prayed to be delivered from the vengeance of the squaws. 'Twas the women, not the warriors, turned those stark enthusiasts pale, for the female of the species is more deadly than the male. Man's timid heart is bursting with the things he must not say, for the woman that God gave him isn't his to give away. But when hunter meets with husband, each confirms the other's tale. The female of the species is more deadly than the male. Well, what do you think of that? Today I will try no longer to be a people pleaser and approval seeker, but to have the strength and courage to be myself. Thank you for listening.